You're too uptight to understand adult relationships." Philip sneered, the words slithering out from between his perfectly white teeth. His voice, usually a smooth, persuasive baritone that could charm clients into signing multi-million-dollar contracts, was now dripping with a condescension so thick it felt like oil slicking the air between us. He leaned back in his plush leather chair, the one that cost more than my first car, a picture of smug superiority in his corner office overlooking the sprawling cityscape of Portland, Oregon. He gestured dismissively with a manicured hand. "Maybe you should find a church job instead." I stood there, frozen on the expensive Persian rug, the termination letter he'd just handed me feeling like a block of ice in my trembling grasp. My face was burning, a hot flush of humiliation and pure, unadulterated rage creeping up my neck. The injustice of it all was a physical blow, a punch to the gut that stole my breath and made my hands shake. I had worked at Belrick Consulting for nearly 10 years. An entire decade. I had walked through these doors as a bright-eyed, ambitious junior analyst and had painstakingly built my reputation brick by brick. I was now one of the most trusted senior analysts in the firm, the quiet, reliable backbone of operations. I specialized in financial strategy and client relations, and I was damn good at my job. I had helped Philip Barrett, the man now sneering at me from across his vast mahogany desk, climb the corporate ladder. I had covered for his mistakes, polished his presentations, and made him look like a genius in front of clients countless times. My loyalty had been absolute, my dedication unwavering. And this was how he repaid me. "My name is Jenna McAllister, and I'm 34 years old. Or, at least, I was when this story began." In some ways, the woman who walked out of that office was born in that moment of fiery indignation. For the past decade, I had been the steady hand at one of Portland's most prestigious consulting firms. I loved the intricate dance of numbers, the elegant logic of a well-crafted financial strategy. My colleagues respected me, clients trusted me, and I had built something I was genuinely proud of. Or, at least, I thought I had. The morning had started like any other Wednesday in October. The Portland sky was a familiar, moody gray, but the air was crisp with the promise of autumn. I arrived at the office at 7 a.m., my usual routine. The quiet hum of the servers and the smell of freshly brewed coffee were my sanctuary. I reviewed the quarterly reports, my mind effortlessly sifting through data, identifying trends and potential red flags. I prepared meticulously for our weekly client strategy meeting, the one I used to lead before Philip insisted on taking over. Everything seemed normal, until Philip called me into his office with that familiar, predatory smirk that always meant trouble. I should have known something was coming when he closed the heavy oak door behind me, the soft click of the latch sounding like a cell door locking into place. He gestured for me to sit down in one of the 2 chairs facing his desk, chairs usually reserved for high-value clients or senior partners. "Jenna, we need to discuss your future here," he had said, his tone suddenly formal and cold, a stark contrast to the easygoing charm he usually employed. I felt my stomach drop, a leaden weight pulling me down. "Is there a problem with my work?" I asked, my voice betraying a slight tremor despite my best efforts to remain composed. "It's not about your work performance," Philip replied, shuffling papers on his desk without making eye contact. The evasiveness was a classic Philip move, a way to make you feel off balance before he delivered the killing blow. "It's about your attitude. Your refusal to be a team player." I knew exactly what he was referring to. It was a thinly veiled reference to an incident from 2 days prior, an incident that had sealed my fate, though I hadn't realized it at the time. He had asked me to lie about his whereabouts during a crucial client dinner. A simple lie, he'd called it. Just a little white one to smooth things over. He wanted me to tell Walter Goodwin, our biggest client, the bedrock of our firm's profitability, that Philip had been with me in a late-night strategy session. The truth? He was at a boutique hotel across town with Walter's wife, Christine. I had refused. Point blank. "I won't do it, Philip," I had said, my voice low but firm. I stood in this very office, feeling the weight of my own integrity. "I will not compromise my professional ethics," Nor will I risk the firm's relationship with our most important client for this. Whatever this is. Philip's jaw had tightened then, a flicker of something cold and hard in his eyes. For a split second, the charming mask slipped, and I saw the ruthless ambition beneath. But then it was gone, replaced by a patronizing smile. "You're making a mountain out of a molehill, Jenna," he'd said smoothly. "But fine. Have it your way." I thought that would be the end of it. I was so wrong. Now, sitting in his office with the termination letter in my hands, I realized just how vindictive he could be. The letter was a masterpiece of corporate doublespeak, citing a failure to maintain professional standards and an inability to work collaboratively. It was all corporate speak for refusing to cover up his sordid affair. As I stared at Philip's smug expression, something cold and calculating settled in my chest, extinguishing the hot fire of my rage. He thought he could destroy my career, my reputation, everything I had worked for, just to protect his secrets. He was about to learn how wrong he was. The path that led to this moment had been building for months. Philip Barrett was a charismatic man in his early 40s, the kind of person who could charm his way into any room and make everyone feel like his best friend. When I first started working directly under him 5 years ago, I admired his confidence and business acumen. He seemed like a born leader, someone who could teach me the finer points of client management and strategic consulting. What I didn't realize then was that Philip's charm was a carefully constructed mask that hid his true nature. Over the years, I had watched him manipulate colleagues, take credit for other people's work, and bend the truth whenever it suited his purposes. I told myself that this was just the way business worked at the highest levels, that I needed to learn to navigate these gray areas if I wanted to succeed. The first real red flag should have been his treatment of his wife, Margaret. She was a lovely woman, a quiet, gentle soul who occasionally attended company events, always perfectly polished and gracious. But I noticed how Philip spoke about her when she wasn't around, the casual dismissiveness, the way he rolled his eyes when she called during work hours. He made jokes about being tied down and frequently stayed late at the office for client meetings that I, as a senior analyst, knew were never on his calendar. My relationship with Walter Goodwin had developed independently of Philip. Walter was a real estate mogul in his late 60s, a man who had built an empire from nothing and valued honesty and straightforward communication above all else. When Philip first introduced us 3 years ago, Walter and I had clicked immediately. He appreciated my direct, no-nonsense approach and my ability to cut through corporate jargon to get to the heart of financial matters. "Jenna always tells me the truth, even when it's not what I want to hear," Walter often said during meetings. "That's why I trust her judgment." This trust had made me invaluable to the firm. Walter's company, Goodwin Properties, represented nearly 40% of our annual revenue. His projects were complex and lucrative, requiring careful financial modeling and strategic planning, all of which fell under my purview. Over time, Walter began requesting that I be present at all major meetings, and he often called me directly when he had questions about our proposals. Philip initially seemed pleased with my relationship with Walter, but I began to notice a shift in his attitude over the past year. He started making snide comments about my special relationship with our client, suggesting that I was overstepping my bounds. He began excluding me from certain meetings and tried to limit my direct contact with Walter, insisting all communication go through him. I thought this was just professional jealousy, a boss feeling threatened by a subordinate's success. I never imagined the real reason behind his behavior until I accidentally walked in on him and Christine Goodwin in the conference room after hours. They sprang apart like guilty teenagers, and Christine quickly excused herself while Philip tried to play it off as a business discussion. That was when I realized that Philip's sudden interest in managing the Goodwin account personally had nothing to do with business strategy and everything to do with his desire to continue his affair with Walter's wife. The breaking point came exactly 1 week before my termination. Philip had been growing increasingly reckless with his affair, and I found myself in the uncomfortable position of having to cover for his absences and mysterious meetings. He seemed to think that my loyalty to the firm meant I would automatically protect his secrets, no matter how dangerous they became. On that Tuesday afternoon, Walter called the office looking for Philip. He needed to discuss an urgent issue with a property acquisition that required immediate attention. Philip was supposed to be in the office, but I knew he was actually at the downtown Marriott with Christine because I had seen his calendar request for a private client meeting at a location that didn't match any of our actual clients. "Is Philip available?" Walter asked when I picked up the phone. "I need to go over these financing terms before the deadline tomorrow." I hesitated for a moment, feeling the weight of the decision. I could lie and say Philip was in another meeting, or I could tell Walter the truth and potentially expose the affair. Instead, I chose a middle path. "He's out of the office on a client matter," I said carefully. "But I can review the financing terms with you and have him call you first thing tomorrow morning." Walter seemed satisfied with this arrangement, and we spent an hour going over the complex details of the acquisition. I made detailed notes and promised to brief Philip as soon as he returned. When Philip finally came back to the office at 5 p.m., his hair slightly disheveled and his tie loosened, I could smell Christine's cloying perfume on his jacket. "Walter needs to speak with you urgently about the Morrison property acquisition," I told him, handing over my notes. Philip's face went pale as he realized how close he had come to being caught. "What did you tell him?" "That you were out on a client matter," I replied evenly. He stared at me for a long moment, and I could see the wheels turning in his head. He was calculating how much I knew and how much of a threat I posed to his carefully constructed double life. "Good," he said finally. "That's exactly what you should have said." But I could see the suspicion in his eyes, the growing realization that I was no longer the naive analyst who would blindly follow his lead. 2 days later, he called me into his office and made his request explicit. "If Walter asks where I was during the Henderson dinner tomorrow night, tell him I was with you, working on the quarterly projections." The Henderson dinner was a major networking event that Philip was supposed to attend. Instead, I knew he planned to meet Christine at her friend's cabin outside the city while Walter was out of town on business. "I won't lie for you, Philip," I said quietly, "especially not to Walter." His expression hardened. "I'm not asking you to lie. I'm telling you what's best for the firm." What's best for the firm is maintaining our integrity with our biggest client. That was the moment I sealed my fate, though I didn't realize it at the time. Philip's mask slipped completely, and I saw the cold calculation beneath his charming exterior. He had already decided that I was too dangerous to keep around, and my refusal to participate in his deception only confirmed his decision. Looking back, I should have seen the termination coming. But at the time, I thought my years of loyalty and my value to the firm would protect me. I was wrong about a lot of things, but I was right about one crucial detail. Walter Goodwin valued honesty above all else. And he was about to learn just how dishonest his trusted consultant had been. The morning after my termination, I woke up in my downtown Portland apartment with a strange sense of clarity. For the first time in months, I didn't feel the constant knot of anxiety in my stomach that had become my daily companion. Philip thought he had destroyed me, but he had actually set me free. I made coffee and sat at my kitchen table, staring out at the Columbia River as I planned my next move. The termination letter sat in front of me, along with the box of personal items I had packed for my office. But hidden beneath my desk calendar and coffee mug was something Philip didn't know about. A USB drive containing copies of every email, calendar entry, and document that had crossed my desk in the past 6 months. As Walter Goodwin's primary point of contact, I had been copied on countless communications that Philip probably forgot existed. Travel receipts for hotel stays that coincided with Christine's spa weekends. Calendar invites for strategy sessions that never appeared on any official client schedule. Even expense reports for dinners at romantic restaurants that Walter certainly hadn't attended. I had started collecting this information 3 months ago, not because I planned to use it, but because I had a growing sense that Philip's recklessness would eventually catch up with him. My background in financial analysis had taught me to always maintain detailed records, and my instincts told me that Philip's affair was heading toward disaster. Now, as I scrolled through the files on my laptop, I began to see a pattern that was even more damaging than I had initially realized. Philip hadn't just been having an affair. He had been using company resources and client funds to facilitate his relationship with Christine. Hotel rooms charged to the Goodwin account, expensive dinners billed as client entertainment, even a weekend trip to Napa Valley that appeared on Walter's invoice as a strategic planning retreat. My phone buzzed with a text message from my friend and former colleague, Lauren Hayes, who still worked at Velrick Consulting. "Can't believe Philip fired you. Everyone's talking about it. He told the partners you had a breakdown and couldn't handle the pressure. Want to meet for lunch?" I stared at the message, feeling my blood pressure rise. A breakdown? Philip was already spinning the narrative, painting me as an unstable employee who couldn't handle the demands of high-level consulting. He was protecting himself by destroying my professional reputation. I typed back quickly. "Lunch sounds perfect. How about that new place on Burnside?" 2 hours later, I sat across from Lauren at a trendy bistro, listening as she filled me in on the office dynamic since my departure. "Philip called an all-hands meeting yesterday," Lauren said, picking at her salad. "He said you had been struggling with personal issues and that your departure was for the best. Then he announced that he would be taking over all direct communication with Walter Goodwin." "Did anyone question it?" I asked. Lauren shook her head. "You know how it is. Philip's a partner, and everyone's afraid to rock the boat. But I will say this, people are confused. You were one of the most stable people in the office. The breakdown story doesn't ring true." "Because it's not true," I said quietly. Lauren leaned forward, lowering her voice. "What really happened, Jenna?" I hesitated for a moment, then decided to trust her. Lauren had been my closest friend at the firm, and I knew she had her own concerns about Philip's management style. "Philip asked me to lie to Walter about his whereabouts," I said. "He's having an affair with Christine Goodwin, and he wanted me to cover for him during client events." Lauren's eyes widened. "Christine Goodwin? Walter's wife?" "The same. And it gets worse. I have evidence that Philip's been charging their dates to company accounts, billing Walter for his own cuckolding." "Jesus," Lauren whispered. "Do you have proof?" I nodded. "More than enough. The question is what to do with it." Lauren was quiet for a moment, processing the implications. Then she looked at me with a mixture of admiration and concern. "You could destroy him," she said finally. Yes, I agreed. I could. That evening, I sat in my home office, drafting the most important email of my career. I had spent hours organizing the evidence, creating a timeline that clearly showed the progression of Philip's affair and his misuse of company resources. The documentation was damning: hotel receipts, restaurant bills, travel expenses, and calendar entries that painted a clear picture of deception and fraud. But I knew that simply sending the evidence to Walter wouldn't be enough. I needed to be strategic about how I presented the information, and I needed to protect myself from any potential legal retaliation from Philip or the firm. I decided to structure the email as an anonymous tip from a concerned employee who had discovered irregularities in client billing. I would let the evidence speak for itself, without making any direct accusations or revealing my identity as the source. The email began simply. "Mr. Goodwin, I am writing to bring to your attention some concerning financial irregularities related to your account with Velrick Consulting. As someone who values your business relationship with our firm, I believe you deserve to know how your funds have been utilized." I attached a detailed spreadsheet showing every questionable expense charged to the Goodwin account over the past 6 months. Hotel stays at the Marriott downtown during times when no legitimate business meetings were scheduled, dinners for 2 at expensive restaurants when Walter was confirmed to be out of town, even spa treatments and shopping expenses that had been creatively categorized as client entertainment. The second attachment was a timeline showing the correlation between these expenses and Christine's documented whereabouts, based on her social media posts and public appearances. The pattern was undeniable. Every romantic expense coincided with times when Christine was publicly absent from her usual activities. The final attachment was the most damaging: copies of Philip's calendar entries showing private meetings and strategy sessions that corresponded exactly with the questionable expenses. I had included screenshots of his appointment descriptions, which were often vague or clearly fabricated. Before sending the email, I took one final precaution. I created a new email account using a public computer at the downtown library, ensuring that the message couldn't be traced back to me. I also made copies of all the evidence and stored them in a safety deposit box at my bank. At exactly 9 p.m. on Thursday evening, I sent the email to Walter's personal address, the one he had given me years ago for urgent matters that couldn't wait for normal business hours. Then I went home and waited. I didn't have to wait long. At 6:15 a.m. the next morning, my phone rang. It was Lauren, and she sounded panicked. "Jenna, you need to know what's happening here," she said in a rushed whisper. "Walter showed up at 7 this morning with his lawyer and his accountant. They've been in the conference room with the partners for 2 hours. Philip looks like he's about to throw up." "What's Walter saying?" I asked, though I already knew. "I don't know the details, but I heard raised voices. Walter was shouting something about betrayal and fraud. The partners have been scrambling, trying to figure out what's going on." I felt a surge of satisfaction mixed with nervous energy. My plan was working, but I knew the real test would come in the next few hours. "Lauren, I need you to keep me updated," I said. "But be careful. Don't let anyone know you're talking to me." "Of course," she replied. "But Jenna, I have to ask, did you send Walter something?" I paused. Let's just say that the truth has a way of coming to light. After hanging up, I realized there was no going back now. I had set events in motion that would either vindicate me completely or destroy what remained of my professional reputation. But as I thought about Philip's smug expression when he fired me, I knew I had made the right choice. By noon that Friday, the situation at Velric Consulting had escalated beyond anything I could have imagined. Lauren called me every hour with updates, each more dramatic than the last. "Walter's not just angry," she reported during her lunch break. "He's talking about pulling all his business and filing criminal charges. The partners are in full panic mode." According to Lauren, Walter had arrived at the office that morning armed with a full forensic analysis of the evidence I had provided. His accountant had cross-referenced every expense with legitimate business activities and found a pattern of systematic fraud spanning 6 months. "The numbers are staggering," Lauren whispered into the phone. "We're talking about over $50,000 in fraudulent charges. Philip used company credit cards to fund his entire affair." But the financial fraud was only part of Walter's fury. The personal betrayal cut even deeper. Walter had considered Philip a trusted friend and advisor, someone he had welcomed into his home and included in family gatherings. Learning that Philip had been sleeping with his wife while billing him for the privilege was a humiliation that went far beyond mere business misconduct. "Philip tried to deny everything at first," Lauren continued. "But Walter had copies of hotel security footage, credit card receipts, even Christine's confession from this morning." That detail surprised me. Christine confessed. Apparently, Walter confronted her last night after receiving the anonymous email. She broke down and admitted everything. She's been having an affair with Philip for 8 months. I felt a complex mixture of emotions, satisfaction that the truth was finally out, sympathy for Walter's pain, and a grudging respect for Christine's decision to come clean rather than continue the deception. The afternoon brought even more dramatic developments. Lauren texted me at 3 p.m. Emergency partners meeting. Philip's been suspended pending investigation. An hour later, Walter's demanding Philip's immediate termination. Partners are trying to negotiate. By 5 p.m., the final blow had fallen. Lauren called me with the news I had been waiting for. "Philip's been fired," she said, barely able to contain her excitement. "Terminated for cause. No severance, no references, and the firm is considering legal action to recover the stolen funds." I sat in stunned silence for a moment, processing the speed and completeness of Philip's downfall. Less than 24 hours ago, he had been a powerful partner at one of Portland's most prestigious consulting firms. Now he was unemployed, disgraced, and facing potential criminal charges. "There's more," Lauren added. Walter specifically asked about you during the meeting. He wanted to know if you were available to return to the firm. My heart raced. What did the partners say? They're terrified of losing Walter's business completely. He made it clear that your termination was one of the reasons he lost confidence in the firm's judgment. He said, and I quote, "Jenna McAllister was the only person in this place who maintained professional standards." The irony was almost overwhelming. Philip had fired me to protect his secrets, but my termination had actually accelerated his downfall by removing the one person who might have convinced him to end his affair quietly. Philip had ensured that his deception would eventually be exposed in the most damaging way possible. Are they offering me my job back? I asked. Better than that, Lauren replied. Walter's insisting that any future relationship with the firm must include your direct involvement in all his accounts. The partners are prepared to offer you a senior partnership track to keep him happy. I leaned back in my chair, feeling a sense of vindication that was almost overwhelming. Philip had tried to destroy my career, but instead, he had inadvertently positioned me for the biggest promotion of my professional life. As I hung up the phone, I realized that my revenge was complete. But more importantly, I had learned something valuable about the power of truth and the importance of maintaining my integrity, even when it seemed costly in the short term. Monday morning arrived with the crisp clarity of a Portland autumn day, and I walked into the offices of Velvet Consulting for the first time in 5 days, feeling like a completely different person. The receptionist, Maria, looked up in surprise as I entered the marble-clad lobby. Jenna, I heard you were... we didn't expect to see you back so soon, she stammered. Change of plans, I replied, with a smile that felt genuine for the first time in weeks. The elevator ride to the 15th floor gave me a moment to center myself. When the doors opened, I could see the entire office buzzing with nervous energy. Conversations stopped mid-sentence as I walked past, and I caught glimpses of hurried whispers and meaningful glances between colleagues. Lauren appeared at my elbow almost immediately. The partners are waiting for you in the main conference room, she said, grinning broadly. Walter's been here since 8 a.m. As we walked down the hallway, I noticed that Philip's corner office was dark, his nameplate already removed from the door. The speed of his erasure from the firm was almost breathtaking. How are you feeling? Lauren asked quietly. Vindicated, I replied honestly, and ready to get back to work. The conference room was packed with the firm's senior partners, their faces a mixture of embarrassment and desperate hope. Walter sat at the head of the table, looking older than I remembered, but with a determined set to his jaw that I recognized from our most challenging negotiations. He stood as I entered, extending his hand with a warmth that had been absent from our recent interactions. Jenna, he said simply, I owe you an apology and an explanation. Neither is necessary, Mr. Goodwin, I replied. I'm just glad the truth came out. The truth, he repeated, shaking his head. I trusted the wrong person and doubted the right one. That won't happen again. Managing partner Catherine Wells cleared her throat nervously. Jenna, we'd like to discuss your return to the firm under new terms. Given the circumstances of your departure and Mr. Goodwin's specific requirements for future collaboration, we're prepared to offer you a position as Senior Vice President with a partnership track. I looked around the room, at the faces of people who had stood by silently while Philip destroyed my reputation just days earlier. The irony of their sudden enthusiasm for my talents wasn't lost on me. Before we discuss my return, I said calmly, I'd like to understand what happened to Philip. Catherine's face tightened slightly. Mr. Barrett's employment was terminated for cause on Friday afternoon. The firm is conducting a full audit of his client accounts and considering legal action to recover misappropriated funds. Walter leaned forward. Philip stole from me, Jenna. Used my money to pay for hotels and dinners while he was sleeping with my wife. But worse than that, he destroyed my trust in this entire organization by firing the one person who could have prevented this disaster. I could see the pain behind his anger, the personal betrayal that went far beyond the financial fraud. Walter had built his business empire on relationships and trust, and Philip had violated both. Both Christine and I are separated, Walter continued quietly. She's moved out of the house, and we're filing for divorce. But she did tell me something interesting before she left. He paused, studying my face carefully. She said Philip was obsessed with getting you out of the picture. Apparently, he was convinced that you suspected the affair and were planning to expose him. He told her that firing you was a preemptive strike to protect their relationship. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. Philip hadn't just fired me to cover his tracks. He had been actively paranoid about my potential threat to his affair. My professional competence and relationship with Walter had made me a target long before I had any real knowledge of his deception. So he created the very situation he was trying to avoid. I see, I said. Exactly, Walter replied with a grim smile. By firing you, he guaranteed that you would eventually discover his fraud and have every motivation to expose it. Philip always was too clever for his own good. Catherine jumped back into the conversation. Which brings us to your future with the firm. Walter has made it clear that any continued relationship between Goodwin Properties and Velric Consulting must include your direct oversight of all accounts. I looked directly at Walter. And what, exactly, are you proposing? That you become my primary point of contact for all consulting services, he replied, with the authority to approve or reject any recommendations from other firm members. Essentially, you would be running a division focused entirely on my company's needs. The offer was more than generous, it was transformative. Philip had intended to destroy my career, but instead, he had positioned me for the kind of advancement that normally took decades to achieve. As I looked around the conference room at the expectant faces of Portland's most powerful consultants, all waiting for my decision, I realized that my revenge was complete. Philip was disgraced and unemployed, while I was being offered his position and more. But the sweetest part of my victory wasn't the professional advancement. It was the knowledge that integrity and truth had ultimately prevailed over manipulation and deceit. I accept, I said simply, and watched as relief flooded through the room like a wave. The path forward stretched ahead of me, bright with possibility, and built on the solid foundation of trust one had spent years establishing with Walter and other clients. Philip had tried to destroy me, but instead, he had inadvertently set me free to reach heights I never could have imagined while working under his shadow. Sometimes, the best revenge is simply living well. But in this case, living well meant stepping into the position that my tormentor had vacated in disgrace. As I shook hands with each partner and began planning my new role, I couldn't help but smile at the beautiful irony of it all. Looking back on this whole experience, I realized that standing up for my principles wasn't just about refusing to lie for Philip. It was about defining who I wanted to be in the world, and that choice ultimately shaped everything that followed.